Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Adobe Live here on Behance. We're live every weekday from 12 till 1, so thank you for coming and joining us again today. We are welcoming back Joe Allam. Welcome, Joe.
Hello. Thanks for having me again. I think this is stream number 4. So
it is, and the pleasure's all ours. I think I learned a lot from the stream that we had last week, and I definitely picked up a lot of bad tips and things, or bad habits, I should say, in Premiere Pro, and you taught me the right path. So I'm really looking forward to what you're going to take us through today. Hey, everybody in the chat, we're chatting live today in Behance, so please join us at behance.net/Adobe Live. The chat will also be in Discord as well, and we'll continue in Discord after. And we're not chatting through YouTube, so definitely join us at behance.net/Adobe Live. Let's say hello to some of the people we have today. Lots of familiar faces. Hi, Sandrine. Hi, Stuart. Hi, Jackie. Hi, Gareth. I can see Robert's back as well. Hi, Sean, James, Andreas. So lots of familiar faces in the chat, all tuning in to see what you've got planned for us today, Joe.
Yeah, it's always it's great to see the same sort of like familiar faces every now and then. The one thing that's really nice with these streams is it does have such a community feel to it. And just hearing about when you're talking beforehand about other streams, and everyone's just kind of like really supportive, and I don't know, I just wanted to point that out, that it's such a pleasant thing to see. Really great in the chat. Yeah. So hey everyone, nice to see you all again.
Yeah, and welcome back, Joe. I mean, as I said, last time you covered some of the basics of setting up, a sequence in Premiere Pro. And I think a lot of people, when you look at Premiere Pro, you can often think, oh my gosh, this is going to be really complicated. Where do I start? And so we began there last week. And it'd be great if you could do us a little recap of what we've already covered and how that leads on to the session today.
Yeah. So if you joined last week, hopefully I didn't go too in depth on the smallest of details, but just to kind of like cover some of the bits that we went through. So last week we were showing kind of like the ins and outs of what makes up a sequence and a timeline in terms of settings on things like your frame rate, project settings, scratch disk, all of those types of admin related tasks. We didn't really get into the nitty gritty of the creative workflow as such, and we showed about adding in clips from your project bins into the timeline, a few keyboard shortcuts. So just a quick reminder on a couple of those that I think got a lot of love in the chat were simple things like when playing through your timeline, pressing an I. So for example here, play your timeline, get to a point that you don't want something, press an O, and then apostrophe to lift out of the timeline. That was one of the tips that really sort of stood out for a lot of people, I think. And then, let me clear that. I've also turned on a keyboard shortcut visualizer, by the way. Hopefully that's helpful this time around. What other shortcuts did we show? There was a few other things, but if you missed the stream last week, it's available to go and watch. But today what I want to run through is more about some of the, I guess, the steps and processes I go through as I finish a project. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to show you the whole workflow on a video, because sometimes these videos can take upwards of 30, 40 hours or so to produce. But I do have an existing project that shows all of the steps broken down in a bit of a Blue Peter, here's one I made earlier sort of moment.
Nice.
So I think where we left off last week, we were assembling items into the timeline, just kind of dropping in various clips and things. And originally the plan was that we were going to make a trailer of various clips together. So I've assembled a new timeline, and this is where I've been piecing together all sorts of clips. I can just play through. So at the moment, what I generally do is I assemble a whole host of clips together that I think have some sort of visual appeal to them. Sometimes they have good audio, sometimes they have bad audio. For example, this one.
I don't think we can hear the, no, I can't hear that coming through.
Oh,
I saw that one of your channels was muted earlier though, but it looks like it's not now.
Share computer sound. Is it playing or not?
No, I can't hear.
Okie dokie. All right, let's skip past some of the audio bits. If anything, that might actually do me a little bit of a favor, because that's always one of the things I worry about most with a live stream, because when you're trying to edit video and you need to pay attention to the audio, it's difficult to also commentate over that and go through those details. So let me run you through some of the visual aspects of how I would treat audio, and hopefully it's enough that can kind of give an idea to things. So for that, let's just jump straight into one of my previous projects, which was a trip to Morocco that I did earlier this year. It was a few months ago now. Right. Can you see my screen okay? It's all there?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, all good. Paris at the moment.
Yeah. All right, so I've got this project open. This is my Morocco project. And if you remember last week, I showed how I had everything all nice and organized. That is one thing out of place. Drop that into the audio. So I keep all of my bins here with my sequences. I have my source video organized by the date. And then within there, it's organized by the camera. Everything is all nice and accessible. This is as much for me as it is for anyone else who may open this project and work on. I will always be an advocate for a clean and organized workflow. It honestly just removes so much stress when it comes to piecing together. You kind of have no excuses for, you know, lost footage or anything like that. Everything should be in its place. And the more that you keep a rigid and strict structure, the better consistency you can have in your end outcome of your work. So this is something I'm a big advocate for.
And that was one of your biggest tips, actually. Sorry to jump in there, Joe. Yeah, because I remember this organization, because I pull from the media browser, which and I remember you saying that would give you migraines. So
yeah,
bins are the way forward.
Yeah, absolutely. You can never have too many bins, even if you're going through, you know, some really specific structuring. Like you may have a bin for the date and then a bin for the camera, and then you may separate that camera between A roll and B roll, and you may separate those between day and night shots. Whatever way you can organize it for yourself that makes it easy to find clips. In the time of digital, you know, filming, we probably shoot far more than we ever need, but it's always good to have those backups. So organization, absolutely. I've got all my titles. I have some adjustment layers. I even have separate adjustment layers depending on the camera. In terms of the actual layer itself, these are all identical. They just have a different name, so that when I piece them into my timeline, if, for example, because I'm mixing footage from, say, GoPro and my Panasonic, I can see on the timeline where those clips are. And that just helps kind of visualize. And I've got different colors preset for these, so that it just marks out huge chapters within the sequence. An area for my photos, because I share a lot of photos in my vlogs. And then anything other, such as color slates and other things behind. So in this previous project that I had, so this was a trip to Morocco, and originally I wasn't actually sure how many videos I was going to make from this trip. So I started piecing together a timeline of what I thought was going to be the initial sort of like day or two of the trip. Hence why it was called Marrakesh to Chefchaouen. What actually happened was I made a video for the whole trip, which covered a number of other cities. So I ended up just renaming the sequence. But I like to keep my sequence names fairly short and fairly succinct. But the key thing is that I always name my sequences ending with an underscore and then a version number. And what happens is, as I'm going through assembling my timeline, I will duplicate the sequence beforehand. So for example, if I had my sequence here, I'd right click and I would choose duplicate. And then if I was making some significant edits, I would do it in the new version under a new version number. You don't necessarily have to do this. There's nothing destructive about doing it all in the one sequence. You're not making your file size huge. But what is nice is that when you look back through, if you happen to cut a piece of video that you didn't think was necessary, and then a couple of days later you're editing and you think, oh, you know what, that clip actually would tell a good part now. If you have those previous sequences, it's so easy to find it.
Yeah.
So I have my version 3 here. Okay, so let's zoom all the way out and you can see there's a lot of clips in here. We've got 30 minutes and 48 seconds worth of footage. And what I generally try and do is when I assemble things onto my timeline, I'll place all of my A-roll, as in everything that I'm talking directly to the camera. So because I'm making vlogs, quite often I'm telling a narrative of holding a camera, saying what we're up to, where we're going, the types of photos I'm looking to capture. I'll place that onto my main timeline, track 1 of the video. So you can see in my timeline over here, the top half of everything here is all the visual elements. The bottom half are all the audio elements. So track 1 on video and track 1 on audio. If I just zoom in with the plus key, I don't think my keystrokes are showing anymore, are they? That's a shame. I don't know what's happened there. If I just tap the plus on the keyboard, I can zoom in on my timeline. You can also zoom in with the dragger on the scroll bar. I find that's actually a very slow workflow to use, and in fact it's lagging a little bit with the stream happening at the same time. But zooming in and out using the plus and minus or the default shortcut, which is the / key, allows you to zoom all the way out onto your timeline so you can see your whole production, and then you can zoom back in. So if you want to go, what would it be, macro and micro level, adjusting between your visual, it's a great way of having an overview of your whole project. Surely this hasn't crashed on that.
See, that's good. When I bring in the clips, I've got to say the way that I work is that I view one at a time to work out what I want from each thing. And then I'll cut it down, but I don't bring everything into the timeline at the same time. So it's good to see that workflow. And actually, I think it was Robert that asked a question earlier on. Do you use I think it was a cutting ratio, I think you said. Let me just see.
Cutting ratio.
Could have been for you to cut your clips. Yeah, it says, does Joe work with a cutting ratio? That was from Gareth.
I have to be honest, I'm not sure what that means. If that's an industry term, then I'm gonna have to say like I am a self-taught. So there may be a process that I use, but as a terminology, cutting ratio.
Oh, here we go. Gareth says, no, don't worry, Joe. Thanks, Gareth, for more info. It says the amount of work that you film to the amount of work that you use in your final edit. Oh,
I see. Yes. Well, actually, here's a good example. So this particular project, if we take, let's go for a brand new sequence, and I can just drop everything in. So I'm just duplicating my sequence, and I'm going to call this one Notice I use the 00 to precede the file so that it goes to the top of the list. I'm going to call this one all footage. I don't need a version control because it's just going to have everything. So this is my standard template structure. So it's got all of my titles and everything ready for me to go. So that's 1 minute 20 of just standard features. If we then drop in everything, I'm just going to hold the whole source code. So that is 1 hour and 1 minute. So about an hour's worth of footage from, I think in total we spent about 7 days in Morocco. So that's actually fairly light compared to other trips. I think with this particular trip, I was potentially just focusing more on photos than I was actually filming it. But yeah, so we've got an hour's worth of footage. The final piece that I published, if I remember rightly, is about 20 minutes or so. So I guess that's like a 3-to-1 ratio, if we're talking in those terms. So anyway, I drop into my timeline and I drop all of my B-roll, as in everything that I film outwardly. It could still be technically classed as A-roll if it's the main thing that I'm showing, but I just use it as a term for anything that's not pointed at me, anything that's pointed out. And I put that onto my secondary video track, my track 2. However, I always keep the audio from the camera on the same audio track 1. And there's a reason for that. So you see here I've got everything on my lower track is talking head, talking to the camera. Everything on my secondary track, which is actually on top of the other video, is on here, whereas my audio always stays on the lower part. And that's because if ever I wanted to mix my audio together, if I didn't want any hard cuts, I can quickly merge between things where I'm talking, such as this clip here, I'm about to start talking, and the previous clip, which had some background ambience audio. I can hold Option, and I can select both of those, and then I can apply a transition between those audio cuts. The default shortcut for that is Shift and D. And if we zoom all the way in, you see that better. It's now done a transition between those, and I can adjust that, and you can see that as I expand that area, it's taking this half. If you imagine this box being an area of covering like a translucent part of audio, if that's the best way to describe it, taking an extra element from this audio, and then from this track taking a preceding element and blending the two together, depending on how big this transition area is. So that's why I keep my audio tracks all on the same level. It just makes it so much easier when I'm blending and merging audio. However, there could be times when, for example, this particular clip, and I know the audio is not really working for us at the moment, but let's say, for example, this particular clip has better background audio, or it has extra layers and elements. I may actually drag that down. And again, if I hold Option, I can select just the audio part, because you see by default, it links the video to the audio. But if I hold Option or Alt on the keyboard, I can select just the audio. I can drag that to be longer or shorter. So for example, if I wanted this background ambience to kind of play over my video, I can drag it beyond its actual video counterpart. So I could have that playing, and likewise, I can again select just the audio, zoom in again, and I could increase that opening transition so that the audio just fades up nicely.
And to drag that longer, oh, sorry, Joe.
No, carry on.
To drag that longer, is that looping the sound, or is that uncovering more, you know, that
yeah, it's uncovering more. So yeah. This particular clip, if I double click it, it brings us back into our source monitor, and we've actually got a handy little illustration, I guess, to show you what's being shown where. So the whole clip itself starts here and ends all the way over here. So I've got so much extra footage. In fact, this is actually quite a funny clip to show. This was a point of the police raiding a street trader. So we've got the video clip highlighted on this top area, and then the audio section is this longer bit in green.
Right.
Because the video is a separate duration to the audio, it's showing those as two separate things. If I was to go back to the clip and drag it back to the same length of the video, you see how that's now gone to a simplified version. So we have our in point and our out point. So all I'm doing is I'm just uncovering more of the video or the audio, depending on which I choose. Likewise, another tip that is useful is ways to reveal more of your footage without having to shuffle and adjust your timeline. So often you see people who are maybe thinking, I've got this clip, but I want to show more of it. So what they'll do is they'll zoom out and they'll then select everything ahead. And they'll take their time doing this. And then they'll go back to the front and then they'll zoom in again and think, no, hold shift and click that one and then move it. That's really time consuming. That doesn't really help us in any way. If you select your clip that you'd like to elongate or shorten, tap B on the keyboard or select your tool here in your toolbar, depending on where you have it on your workflow. And now when we hover to the edge of the clip, we get this yellow icon. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to expand and push everything forward in the timeline. So as I drag it, you see I can expand the clip. And in my preview, or in my program monitor, I can actually see a preview of what it is that I'm doing. And as I expand it, you'll notice everything else in the timeline shunts forward. So as a quick way of just pushing everything forward, or likewise bringing everything back, such a simple tool that I think gets overlooked by a lot of beginner editors.
Definitely. And you got a really good question actually that's come up from Angus in the chat. And Angus asks, Joe, before or during the filming process, do you think visual first and audio later, or a combination of both?
That I am actually so glad to have someone ask. So often it's the visual that catches my attention. But before I ever press the shutter, it's always my ears that I pay attention to. And it's a subconscious thing. I guess it takes a lot of editing to sort of bring that closer to your subconscious. But I am that type of person who, when around other people, I will tell them, like, do you mind just hushing a little bit? Because any sort of extra audio that distracts from what you're looking at, it really can make or break a clip. And sometimes it could be a case of, especially if there's anything vocal, if I'm talking to the camera, if I'm trying to pick something else up that has some audio, any sort of distance audio, whether that's like a siren or, I don't know, some loud birds or something that's kind of not really natural to the scene that you're showing, can really distract from an image. And what you don't realize is that the microphones pick it up so much more than we actually do, because a microphone is just direct. It brings in everything that's there. So yeah, that's definitely a huge focus. I think as viewers, we have a tolerance for a fairly poor image quality, so long as the audio is good. In reverse, it really doesn't work. If you have bad audio, people switch off so quick.
That's true.
So yeah, I really do focus on audio hugely.
And any tips, right, for if you're filming and there's a lot of wind, it's a windy day? Because I often find that that's the hardest thing to edit. And it's the hardest thing to voice over and try and, what tips would you give for that kind of
I actually had an issue with that just the other day. So I picked up a new microphone. It's actually this one I'm using here. So this is the Rode VideoMic NTG, and I don't have a wind filter for it yet. But I wanted to test the microphone, and likely I wanted to test it in the wind. It performed better than I hoped, but I could still hear the wind. And what happens is the camera, if you have it on an auto setting, quite often it will drop the audio or dip the audio as the wind hits the microphone. So as much as you're trying to prevent it, the camera itself can actually lower the audio quality. So without you realizing, you're talking and then suddenly your voice goes really soft and then it goes up again. You can't hear the wind, but that's the camera doing the work for you, which isn't really helpful. So if you can, I'd turn off the auto wind setting. It sounds counterintuitive, but for a consistent approach, you're better off, as with most things in a camera, you're better off fixing it at the source. The second thing would be, if you can, or if you're using an external mic, definitely get what's known as a dead cat, which is like a fluffy windshield. In fact, I have one right to hand.
And we've got a question about the mics you use, actually. I'll let you show that first, and then I've got a question for you.
Yeah, so this is a dead cat. So it's just like a fluffy sort of, I guess, faux fur fiber type thing. And what it does is it just captures the wind, so it doesn't actually hit the elements of the microphone. And it doesn't really affect your audio. It can introduce a more sort of bassy sound, but I can actually show you through how you would correct that, because it doesn't pick up as much of the higher range of detail in the clarity. But yeah, these are invaluable. In fact, I've just ordered one for this microphone.
They are good. And Gareth asks, do you use directional mics, omnidirectional, or radio mics?
So pretty much all of the vlogging I'll do will be into something like this, which is the Rode NTG. So that's an on-camera shotgun mic. So it's a mono microphone, and it's directional. The pickup pattern of it, which is the term for the shape of the surroundings that it picks up, is mostly in front, with a little bit of a tail sort of sound. That's just down to the physics of how the audio works. And that is directional and it's mono. But I actually use, and I've made a video about this on my channel, I use a mono to stereo splitter in my camera. And that allows me to plug in the microphone, this mono microphone, as well as another mono microphone, which is an omnidirectional. And then it splits into my timeline with left and right audio tracks. For the most part in my timeline, and I can show you here actually, if I go to audio channels, for the most part in my timeline, I actually just show the 2 left clips. And that's the left channel being from this microphone. If this is going a little too detailed, there is a video on my channel, and there's I've got a blog post that talks about this as well. But essentially it just has all of the audio from the one microphone. My right channel, which is the omnidirectional mic, I only ever use that if I'm pointing the camera away from me and talking. That way it picks up my voice and it's not muffled because the microphone's pointed away from me. But if I show you how it looks by default, where we have left channel to left, right channel to right. If we now look in the timeline, I'm just going to expand that. You notice how my left channel is got a very huge waveform and the right channel doesn't. And if we play it,
we can't hear it.
Again, I know you can't really hear that, but it's going to come out of just one of the speakers predominantly, and then everything else is going to be omnidirectional. Yeah. So if I wanted to switch my audio between back of camera, front of camera, it's a little bit of a hack, but it works surprisingly very well. And again, I'll just switch that back to left and left. And I guess a little tip there on why did I choose the left, why did I choose the right? The right channel I've left as the rear, because right being R for rear, just a little memory tip there.
Nice. And there's lots of questions on this actually, Joe, and I think that this has prompted Tim to look into maybe running an audition Adobe Live, everybody, because there's lots of questions about you know, left and right, and how we you know, if we duplicate channels in Audition. Great tip though with the turning off the wind feature in the mic, because I was going to say that's one of the hardest things I find, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
I mean, I'm happy to talk a lot about audio, because there's a lot that I do in Premiere that's audio related that probably goes unnoticed, and it goes unnoticed by design, because if you were to notice something, then it stands out as an issue. So in fact, I can actually run you through some of the extra audio things that I do, which I think, in my eyes, they've elevated the level of my quality. It's one of the most significant things that I notice as someone who's paying attention to it, and other people subconsciously may or may not notice. So for example, we have this clip here, which is just me talking to the camera. some other guys join us. One of the key things that I will do is I will adjust and equalize some of the audio from the microphone so that it sounds crisper and clearer and at a consistent audio level throughout the whole timeline. Now, there are a couple of ways you can go about this. The most basic way and most common way is if you were to open your effects window, which mine is just hiding down here. If you go into our audio effects, and you have filter and EQ, and you've got graphic equalizer, 10 band, 20 band, 30 band. This is probably one of the most simplified and basic ways of doing it, and you can drag that effect onto your audio. This is all great. You can then click onto your audio effect controls and then scroll down to your audio, and here you can edit and make your adjustments. Where does that window appear to? Do we know where that window has gone? We did this last time.
Yeah, I remember.
I've scaled my resolution. I'm not sure where that goes. Anyway, I can simulate it. When you click edit, it opens up a 10 band equalizer and you can adjust it. That's all well and good, but the only difficulty is that you've done it on one clip and you then have to copy that edit and go through and do it on all your other clips. That takes time, and that's not my way of working. That's not an efficient method. So I'm going to delete that effect and erase that from your memory. If you have something specific on that one clip, then that's great. But as I mentioned earlier, I keep all of my audio on the same track, in particular, all of the audio that I'm talking to the camera. So if we open up in your window and you have the audio track mixer, I have mine in a workspace over here. This is a way that you can set audio effects based on each individual track of your video. So I have, 5 tracks of audio here to match up the 5 levels of 5 tracks I have in my timeline. So on the very first one, and I've built this into my template file as well. So if you remember last week, we made a template. I've already pre-added these effects because it's always the same effects I use from vlog to vlog. So it just saves me one step every time I edit. We have here a graphic EQ. And again, I can't open that window. Just wondering if I spin this over to my second display, wondering if I can open it there.
We get to see that lovely bridge again, that great shot you took in California.
No, I can't show you this EQ. Oh, that's a real shame. I'm not sure. I think the window is loading up somewhere up here because I've rescaled the screen. And
you said that you do have a YouTube channel for this. Sorry, you've got this session in Audition, right? On your YouTube channel, right?
Not quite this detail, unfortunately. Let me just do a quick. I'm just going to pull up an image to show you what a graphic EQ looks like.
Gareth's offering a bit of help here. He says, can you tab through Windows? See if it comes up.
I'll just show you this. Okay, so when you open your graphic EQ, you get a window that looks similar to this. This one is actually a 20 band, so we have 20 different levels of audio. And effectively, you have to the left, everything that's low and bassy and just those deep sort of rumble sounds. And everything to the top is your high pitch audio. And what I generally do with my EQ is I will lower, or rather I will raise some of the mid areas. So anything around like 1000 to 2.5 or 4000 hertz on the ratio, I will raise maybe 2, sometimes even 3 decibels. And that's enough to just bring out that crispness. And as you're playing it, you can adjust your EQ and you can hear that crispness. It's the same as a bit like if you've just eaten an apple and when you talk, everything's just kind of a little bit better enunciated and it's not muffled in any sort of way. And sometimes I'll raise a little bit of the bassy area towards the lower, like a 125 to 200 sort of area. So you kind of have this curve that goes sort of like a U shape, and that's really great for talking, because it just brings out that clarity in the vocals. And then beyond that, so if we come back to our audio track mixer, the final adjustment I do is a hard limiter. And this is a way that we cap the audio. So we can apply an amplification in this effect. So I'm amplifying the audio, I think it's about 3 decibels by default. But then I'm applying a cap at, I think I have it at 0.5 decibels. So what that means is that when we're playing in our audio track volume over to the side, you see in this area we get the red peaking, and we see where the audio is just really like crunching the speaker. By putting a hard limiter, we never actually blow that audio. It never goes beyond the certain level. And this has actually been a huge tip for me as a consistency aspect, because I can apply an amplification, but I can limit it so that every track gets brought up to almost to like the same lowest common denominator. It just means from clip to clip, when you're talking, it's really smooth. And finally, at the very end, this area over here is all of your tracks merged together. I have a loudness radar. And this is like a universal audio, it's the simplest way of describing it, like a signature of what that video should be at a loudness, depending on its use case, whether it's, say, YouTube or Vimeo, broadcast. Each platform will have its own sort of recommended settings. For YouTube, the target loudness is between -13 and -15. I believe it's in LUFS, LUF is the measurement for that. And that just means that when viewers across the platform go from your video to another video, if everything matches the same target loudness, they're not going to be adjusting their volume. So it's just best practice to join in with that sort of consistency across the platform, as well as being consistent from your video to your video.
That's a great tip, really good. And just to remind everybody as well, we're just over halfway through, and if you want to join in the chat today, get involved at behance.net/Adobe Live. We're not chatting on YouTube, but we are chatting in Behance, so come and join us, and on Discord as well.
So yeah, the audio is I could talk for hours about the audio. I'm passionate about that. So I'm glad we went through the audio track mixer, because that's, I think, a hidden feature. I first started using that, I think it was actually Rufus. He was doing a live demo at the Adobe Sundance event. I think it was a couple of years ago, and he opened this window and just started going through, and I thought, well, that saves me so much time, because I don't have to do it clip by clip. I can just do it for everything. It's brilliant. Okay, let's move on to a later part of the sequence. So once I've kind of assembled everything, I would then start to layer up my video further. So as we just opened up, this is now version 6. You can see I've still got the same sort of structure of all of my clips talking to camera and then ahead. And you can see now the overall duration has been cut down to 36 minutes. So we're still going through the process of cutting. But we've got this new layer here, which is my adjustment layer for color correction. Similar to the audio track mixer, this layer is applicable to everything that falls below it. So once you start to do color correction and any sort of like visual correction across multiple things, it's really convenient to use an adjustment layer. So from our project bin over on the left, I can tap new and I can do adjustment layer, or I've got a few already made here, and these are my colored ones. And again, I can just drag and drop it into my timeline and drop it wherever I need it to be. That as a whole does nothing. It's just a layer. You then have to interact with it and do more. So when we select our adjustment layer and we open up the Lumetri color, if you don't have that open, go into Window and Lumetri color. This is where we can start to make adjustments to our videos. So I'm actually just going to turn off that one. So by default, this is how the clip looks out of camera. And then what I want to do is just apply some color correction. And again, I do it as an adjustment layer so that it's consistent across the whole video. You may want to break up your adjustment layer if your video has clear chapters, such as like a night or a day section, and you don't want your video to kind of take everything that affects the night stuff and apply it to your day stuff. But for the most part, a single adjustment layer can work really well, and then you can actually add further adjustment layers to build up extra chapters. So in here we have our basic correction, and everything is just reset to 0. But we can do things such as adjusting the color temperature. Now remember, this isn't raw video, it's not the same as a raw photo. So you can't go too wild on it without it destroying your image. But it can be helpful if, for example, you wanted to fix like a slightly off balance image. So for example, imagine if I'd filmed everything with the wrong white balance. I could go through and I could do an adjustment layer across the whole timeline, correct that color temperature, and then everything from there onwards is nice and easy to work with. So we have our color temperature, we have exposure. Likewise, again, you may want to set your camera to film in a lower exposure mode so you can do overall adjustments. But for the most part, in my overall adjustment layer, I don't do too much with the basic correction. I leave that down to the creative, and this is where I have a few LUTs that I use. So LUTs, which are lookup tables. These are kind of presets that I've created on like a color signature that I use for my videos. And that is effectively a collection of all of these adjustments together, and then some other ones. So for example, if I was doing this particular clip, I may want to bring the shadows down because I filmed it in a like a fairly flat profile on the camera. Could increase the contrast slightly, raise the white point, drop the black point, and adjust the saturation only a tiny bit, I guess. But you can see I can tweak that, and if I just turn that off, you can see how from standard, this was out of camera, it's very flat, it's very easy to manipulate. I've set that purposely on my camera. And then with my adjustment layer, we've added more life back into the image. So this is how you would do it manually. But as I said, I actually leave mine fairly blank. And that's because I use LUTs. And LUTs are available from various places. You can get them from your camera manufacturer if you have like a mirrorless camera that shoots in a log profile or something. And it's a way to bring back more sort of data and depth to your image in a color space. I have some LUTs available as well. And the one that I use quite often is my urban standard. You see immediately that brings back all of those edits and adjustments. Now you don't need the LUTs. That's definitely a thing to point out. You don't need these LUTs. What they do help with is saving you time. Because I could have, instead of applying these LUTs, I could have spent longer on my basic correction and opening up my curves. And I could have made more adjustments to my curves in the same way that you would with Lightroom for photos. I could make those same sort of adjustments, but the difficulty is that I then have to do that time and time again. So using a LUT or even saving a LUT from these corrections that you've made can just save you time in the future. All about consistency and efficiency. So if we turn back on our LUT, and the other benefit with a LUT is that you can bring back the intensity. So if you apply a LUT and you think, whoa, that's a little too strong, or if your camera doesn't shoot in a flat profile, you can draw it back if you don't want it to be too intense. So in this case, I may actually drop that back to say 95%.
And I guess like this is where people would play, you know, like you see like Made in Chelsea on the TV, where everything looks like an Instagram filter has been placed on the, you know, it looks like that kind of coloring. And any videos actually, I'm on Instagram a lot. I scroll through there, and then I always think of this lumetri color. And obviously people have had to play around, but they've given it that kind of look and feel, and that's where they've done it.
Yeah, it's this is kind of where you add, I guess, a signature to your color. And likewise, if you're using the same LUT from video to video, it becomes like a channel signature. Yeah, I love them for efficiency. Some people hate them. Like, that's definitely a thing. Unfortunately, there's not a single best like LUT to use. It varies from use cases. They work differently depending on the cameras that you use. Some may have been created that don't adhere to highlight clipping and other things. You can get some abnormal sort of reactions to them. So there is difficulty in that, but when you get a set that works for your camera and matches well, that's where you then make only minor tweaks throughout your video and still get a great looking result. And just a final note to point on my overall adjustment is I do add some sharpening. So in my camera, I tone down the sharpening so that I can always add it back in post-production if I need to. In this case, I have got to know my camera well, that adding 15 sharpening based on my current camera settings comes out with a nice crisp image that I'm happy with.
And Joe, Gareth asks a question here, and he says, so it remembers what the original was shot at. Is that right?
So this is just an adjustment layer that I can turn off. So the original clip is there. It's not actually manipulating that clip at all. That clip remains the same. You're just applying a look over it so that when you export the video, it sort of pancakes everything together and brings those adjustments together. So it doesn't actually affect the original file. You can go and reuse it and you can make adjustments. So that's where, bringing me on to the next point, where I have my adjustment layer over everything. What I will then do is I'll go through the video clip by clip, and I'll turn off, you see this blue marker over here, that just stops this being selected, so that as I drop the playhead, rather than it choosing the topmost layer to select, it just means that as I click through, it selects only the ones I want to interact with. So what I'll do is I'll go through clip by clip, select each individual video clip, and then again in my Lumetri, I can make further adjustments just to that one clip. So now it's going to compound the overall adjustment as well as that individual clip's adjustment. So for example, this particular one, I may actually want to just bring the exposure down via the shadows and the highlights, and maybe drop back the contrast so it reveals a little bit more detail in some of these.
And Joe,
you see how I've now, yep.
Sorry to jump in again. So Gareth asked, do you know the color depth for Premiere Pro? Is it 8-bit, 16-bit, 32?
It's more, you'd need to pay attention to the color depth of your camera. So the GH5 that I filmed this trip on is a 10-bit camera. 10-bit being generally the minimum for broadcast standards. If you're shooting with, say, a Sony A7, or any of the A7 series or the A9, those are 8-bit cameras. Unfortunately, 8-bit doesn't have as much color depth, so you can't actually manipulate it too far without getting a degrading effect. But Premiere itself should handle all sorts of varieties of color depth. Pretty much any camera you throw at it. I mean, I think like a red camera can even do 14, maybe 16 bits, which is just billions and billions of colors. So yeah, 10-bit color depth gives you more, I guess, flexibility in terms of what you can do. And when I say an image would degrade, I mean in areas where you've got shades of colors, which is most common in, say, a sky. So a sky can go for a deep blue all the way to a light blue. If you start pushing and pulling it around, the processing can't give you a smooth effect. And what you end up with is banding, where you get these clear blocks where the color just doesn't blend well because you've manipulated it too far. That could be the effect of just pushing too far on your highlights and shadows, or it could be a LUT that you're using is being used on a camera that can't really handle too much. So yeah, the bit depth is down to the camera primarily.
Sandrine shares that's the same problem with gradients in photos. I've seen that before.
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I mean, if we could get the same depth of photos, I mean, most cameras these days are 14-bit depth, which is great in a RAW file. And think of video editing a little bit like editing a JPEG. You can't push and pull a JPEG as much as you can a RAW photo. And that's because a video is essentially, it's like a motion JPEG. Every frame is its own formed, it's baked. It's not the raw ingredients. If you're shooting with RAW video, which is coming to more and more cameras on the sort of prosumer, like mirrorless world, then yeah, you'll have more detail to that. And I'm actually really looking forward to testing that. But for most of us, we don't have access to those types of cameras. So we are having to pay attention to not push things too far. So yeah, I'll go through my individual clips on a clip-by-clip basis, and I can use up and down on the keyboard. You notice how that just jumps per clip. Generally, I only ever need to see the first frame of video. So for example, this one, I can tell immediately that this particular clip, it needs to be brought down on the exposure. So the highlights are a little bit too strong. So I'm going to bring the shadow down and drop the contrast. But also the white balance is off. Things are looking a bit orangey, a bit kind of green in areas. So I can adjust the color temperature and I can make things cooler, I can make things warmer. Or a simple tip is to grab the eyedropper and select a neutral color within the frame. That would be my door. So I just select a neutral clip, and you see it's now dropped the temperature to -10. So it's gone on the slightly cooler side, and it's just brought it back to life a little bit. I could also go into my curves, and I could make some more specific adjustments to my color. So for example, I can tell here the skin tones really aren't looking very accurate. It's a little bit too saturated. I'm actually gonna just drop highlights down just a tad bit more. Go into the curves. And again, with my eyedropper tool, I can target a specific area, and you see it's made 3 points. And now I can drag this down. I'm just going to slowly desaturate an area so it's not too, I guess, like it's not too vibrant on a scene. Skin tones is an area that you really need to pay attention to. If you get it right, it's unnoticeable, but if you get it wrong, as humans, we're drawn to it immediately. It stands out. And that's definitely one of the most difficult areas, I'd say, of getting exposure correctly is making sure that your skin tones are correct. So I'm aware that we're slowly running out of time. I'm just going to double check if there was anything else.
Yeah, 7 minutes or so left. Any questions, anybody? Please get those in the chat if you want to get those answered today.
So with the color correction, and if we go back to my sequences, so I would go through and I would do all of my color correction until eventually, in this particular project, I got to version 10. So version 10, if I just tap tilde on the keyboard, this is how the sequence looked for a finished vlog. So this is a 20-minute piece, and if we zoom in, we can see all of the different clips and different layers of everything. Likewise, we have further layers of titles. So I have my title templates that I just drop in, and everything's all conveniently accessible. I've done a previous stream on some title design work, so if you want to check out how they work in terms of video and dropping them in, that could be a useful thing. But yeah, hopefully that's given some insight into some of the finessing of details on color correction and audio, and it's tricky to show an editing process without having the audio to go through, but likewise focusing in on it. So I hope this is shown a good sort of ready-made approach.
It did. And it's so many questions actually on the audio that it's definitely got us thinking about running an Adobe Live for audio in a lot more detail. So we have to have you back, again, Joe. So,
I think a lot as well, before you even get to the software, there's so much to learn on just the hardware aspect, just on correct technique. And, everything is all about getting it as best you can in the camera or in the microphone first, and then using the software as your advantage to elevate it rather than to correct your mistakes.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks for the tips, filming in windy conditions and things like that. As I think a lot of us are using video these days to, for new means, as we're all, so remote. And that's definitely one problem that you fixed for me today. That's why I find these so useful, honestly. It's so good picking up these tips. Happy days. Well, thank you for showing us this. I did have one last question for you, and that was that at the beginning, one of the biggest tips that you've provided us all with is the organization and the key to, setting yourself up for success at the start, so that you actually spend less time in the editing process. And at the start, in your folders, you had a folder of titles, and as well as all of your other clips. Do you find that you go into either After Effects or to the graphics panel in Premiere Pro to make your titles first and build them and save them in a bin and then add them to your timeline? Or do you add them as you go in your timeline? Because obviously what we've done today is we pieced everything together, so we haven't seen every part.
Yeah, I mean, I've got time to go over and share that if we're happy to do that.
We've got 3 minutes. Go for it.
So I utilize the Creative Cloud libraries to store my titles. So I create them in After Effects as motion graphics templates. I've actually got a recent video on my channel that shows how you actually convert After Effects animations into motion graphics. And these titles are ones that I've personally just released as well. So in my libraries, I have all of my titles, and again, they're all numbered and organized for me. And I would simply drag and drop and place them into my timeline. So I've just placed that one here. And I then go into my essential graphics, and this is where I've got all of my controls for my titles. There's a few tools that I've built in, so I use a narrower aspect ratio, so I'm just going to enable that. Puts the title in a nice convenient position. And let's say this is a particular part of the video where I'm talking about my Instagram. So I'll choose my Instagram icon, subtext, I could put follow me, and that's just going to update there. And I'll do my username, and I'll do the URL. So now my title is updated and everything's all there. I generally apply my titles towards the end of a video, because if you're not careful, there's such a small element to your timeline as you're chopping and changing, cutting things around. I have been known in the past when I'm going through my edit, and just as I'm about to export it, I realize a title has been left behind on a layer too far up, or it's very easy to have them kind of forgotten in that sense, because especially when you're zoomed out, you see they take up such a small area. Likewise, any sort of typos and things like that, once you've placed your titles, it's difficult to remember to go back and check all of those things when you come to export it. So I generally leave my titles until towards the end, and that way I know my clear chapter points of, this is my talking point of I'm talking about my Instagram, so follow me on Instagram. Here's a title for that. And then also just before exporting, I'm in the mindset of double checking everything. So I type out slowly to make sure I don't have typos. And yeah, I just keep everything organized in the Creative Cloud libraries, which keeps it synchronized. If I had another computer, I could go onto that and they're just there ready and waiting for me. I don't have to manage the files and those types of things.
Yeah, that's good. And I remember you always saying, you know, that you file it in a way that if somebody else came to work on your project, that they would know where everything is. And
yeah,
aside from there,
make your future self thank your past self.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Joe. Honestly, thank you so much. It's been really interesting today. Definitely looking forward to covering some more topics with you as well in the future. Everybody, we are back here live tomorrow from midday to 1 p.m. We have Eleanor Shakespeare here tomorrow with 60 questions. And Eleanor is a graphic designer and photographer from London. So that should be a really great session to join. So thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Joe. And see you all soon.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Joe.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.